Hi everyone, my name is Tatiana the Slow Crafter and welcome to my channel. Before I tell you how I got the inspiration for this card, I'll just explain how I'm making this sky background. I'm using salvage patina oxide ink and I'm just brushing it on there very lightly because I want it to look like a sort of cloudy sky. I don't want the blue to be perfectly solid because that's not really how a sky looks. So I'm trying to just put it on there lightly and not have it look too perfect. And then I'm going to take an old woodblock stamp that is made by Inkadinkadoo, and I don't have the name because there really isn't one on the side of the stamp. So if you're looking for this stamp, it's just a polka dot Inkadinkadoo stamp. And I'm putting the ink on and then stamping off once. And as a small reminder for us who don't use woodblock stamps very often, it's so much easier to put the paper onto the rubber as I just did there rather than try to stamp down, because I don't even know why I was doing that. I know that it's easier to do it that way, but I think out of force of habit I was just trying to stamp down with the woodblock. But if you're using a large background stamp like one of those 6x6 stamps we often get, or a stamp like this that has wood, it's way better to do it this way, because then you have control over which portions of the stamp you are inking with your fingers. You can just push on the parts that you want to have inked and don't push on the parts that you don't. So in this case, I wanted the background to look kind of messy, and I think I achieved that. And now I'm just taking some ink and going back over it to just sort of mix it all together. So now I'm taking some vintage photo distress ink, and I want this to look vintagey. So I love old things, and I haven't made a card in a while that looks old, and I just had the urge to do that. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just trying to make this kind of look like there's no other word for it, I guess, just vintagey, like an older card. And as you can see, definitely not trying to be perfect. In fact, I'm trying to make it look a little bit messy. Now I've got a Tim Holtz Ledger Script stamp, and I'm using the smaller of the two. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to begin to make the background for the letters that I'm going to cut out, which is the idea behind this whole card. Is that I got the idea for this card when I was at an antique market, and I have a booth at an antique market, and I've had numerous people. I sell my cards at the booth, by the way. I put them in an old suitcase, and I've had numerous people say to me, "Do you make these cards?" And I'm always surprised when they ask me that, because to me it seems really obvious that I make the cards, but then it hit me at some point that these cards must look like they're bought or something, I guess, to people. So then I started thinking, how can I make my cards not look so perfect? I realized it was because I was using dyes, and dyes are so perfect, and I think that's why people are asking me, are these actually handmade? So then I thought, wow, how could I make it look more handmade? And so this is how I'm trying to achieve that. So I've made the background just by stamping that stamp repeatedly, and then I'm just freehanding it here. I'm just cutting out letters, and I didn't find this difficult to do, but if you don't think that you could do it this way, then you could just write the letter, like write out a letter H, for example, and then draw a border around the letter H, and then just cut out on the border that you drew around the letter H. And if you don't think you could do either of those, although there's no reason you can't, because this is meant to look hand cut. That's the whole idea of it. It's meant to look like it's not coming from a die. So we all have our own style of doing this, and I think before you say to yourself, I can't do this, just try it. Just try cutting out one letter, try cutting out an H, or try cutting out a Y. And I think you'll be pleased with the result, because it's going to look like you. It's going to look like how you write. And so a little bit more of you will be in the card. But you could also use a stencil, a letter stencil, if you didn't feel that you could freehand cut, or you don't think that you could print it out and then draw around it. But I know you can. Trust me, I know you can. But if you don't want to do that, you could use a letter stencil to trace the outline of a letter and then cut it out. But even that's not what we're getting at here. We want to use your own handwriting, your own printing to do this because we want it to look handmade. So I've made the background just from stamping that blue stamp with the same color ink as the color that I blended onto the background with, just so that it all matches. And then after I finish cutting out the letters, I'm going to do the same thing that I did to the circumference of the card. I'm going to use Vintage Photo Distress ink to just go around the letters and just to give them a little bit of definition so that they stand out from the background, because we are using the same color on the letters as we used on the background. So if I didn't outline them with this ink, then they would probably not stand out all that well against the background. So another part of the inspiration for this card is that I started thinking about how there's sort of a formula for making a good card. So we watch videos and we all look at each other, and we know that we're supposed to stamp out a sentiment and then cut that into a rectangle and put it on a card. And I find that what ends up happening is our cards all start looking somewhat the same. And so I'm always trying to think of different ways that I can make a card look different from what's out there. How can I make something that still looks good but looks different? And this is my attempt at doing that. Just trying to be different, I guess. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to use the other half of that piece of card to make the sun. So I'm taking embossing ink and I'm just dragging it right across the paper. I want it to be completely covered with embossing ink. And then I'm using Tim Holtz glaze. Now this is it is an embossing powder, but it's a glaze embossing powder, so it won't be opaque. You're going to be able to see through it when you're done. So as you can see, you can still see the letters through it because it's translucent. So I'm completely covering the entire card, and then I'm going to take my embossing heat gun, excuse me, after I get this completely covered, and you can just barely see where it's converting that powder into a solid plastic covering for the cardboard. And so when I get this all done, I'm going to do the same thing with my scissors. I'm just going to hand cut a sun. And I know that everybody can do that. You just hand cut a circle. And then for the rays, I'm just hand cutting some triangles. And that's not difficult either, right? It's really easy, actually. The most difficult part is trying to figure out how big you need the sun to be for the size of card that you're making. So this card that I'm making is a 6x6 card, and I know that people don't really like that size. I don't think most of the time, because it's difficult to find a paper base that size. I use watercolor paper, by the way, if you're ever wondering how to make a 6x6 card. You can use 12x12 paper, or you can use 9x12 watercolor paper like you get at Walmart. So again, I'm just hand cutting the little mouth for the sun. It's not hard to do that either. And later I'll show you how I make the eyes. So I'm just putting a little more ink around the edge of the card because I didn't feel it was dark enough. I wanted it to be a little bit darker. And that's basically it as far as the hand cutting part goes. And as you can see, there was nothing very difficult about that at all. So once I've got the card inked up around the edges to the desired color, I'm just going to place the letters on there so that I've got them I'm just getting the placement right. And that's another reason that I like 6x6 cards for something like this, is because it gives you a lot of space. There's a lot of real estate on there. And I do have some 6x6 envelopes, so I make them from time to time. It's actually one of my favorite sizes to make, even though I know it's not popular. So when I'm placing the rays, once again, I'm not thinking about having it done perfectly, because you don't need to, right? It's not meant to look perfect. And so anyway, the letters, I decided they weren't dark enough. So I'm doing the same thing as I did with the sun, except this time so I dipped all of the letters into the embossing ink. I completely covered the front of the letters. And then I'm just going to cover them all with that blue Salvage Patina glaze, Tim Holtz glaze. And then once again, it's translucent, so you can see right through it to the stamping. And I think I may have had to redo the inking of the letters. It's still there, but I think I can't remember now if I redid it or not. Maybe I didn't redo it. No, I guess I didn't, because if there's glaze on top, that doesn't make sense, because then it would just wipe off. Okay, so I've got all the little rays in the right position, and now I'm just going to glue them down. And I kind of did them perfectly. I wish I would have pushed some in a little bit more than others. I think I did right there, but it's really hard to get rid of the habit of doing things perfectly when I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I mean trying to do things perfectly because you're so used to doing that. So when it's time to do things so that it looks like they're not perfect, it's actually kind of difficult. You have to really think about it. And I think I forgot that I was trying to do things wonky, and I kind of did it. But anyway, whatever. It's a handmade card, so we're just going to do it the way we do it, and I like the way it turned out, so who cares what I did there, right? Okay, so now I'm just taking some foam tape, and as I mentioned in my last video, I like this foam tape because it's not that high. It's only about 1 millimeter or 2 thick, and it doesn't pop things up as much off the card as normal. And now I'm just taking some glue and I'm putting my letters down so that they fit the card. And what's nice about this kind of style is you don't have to worry too much. You can see they're not in a straight line at all. They're sort of messy, and that's once again the whole idea. And there we go, that's done. And so I've got the little mouth on there. And then for the eyes, I just took a couple of little enamel dots and popped them on. And then I realized that I was thinking, oh, should I use enamel dots or should I use Nouveau drops? But then I thought, no, I have 2 black enamel dots, I might as well use them. But then I started thinking about Nouveau drops and how I could use them on the letters, because I thought, oh, it would be neat to put a little middle to the letters. So the next step here, after I've got the eyes stuck on there, is I start using my Nouveau drops. And Nouveau drops, you see how I'm tapping the bottom there? If you can't get the Nouveau drop, if it's standing up, if it's looking like a chocolate chip, they tell you that you should tap the back of the card and that will make it sit down. And I think, you see how I just wipe it off? That's another nice thing about putting the glaze on things, is if you don't like the way it turns out, you just wipe it right off, which I continue to do, as you can see, over and over here. And you don't have to feel like you're wasting it, because the fun fact, there's something like 700 Nouveau drops in a bottle of Nouveau drops, so you don't have to worry about it. But anyway, thanks very much for watching. Like and subscribe if you like, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.